All right, today we're tackling a really fascinating and honestly a pretty unsettling idea. It's called a malicious legal transplant.
Wow, that quote, it just hits you, right? It perfectly sets the stage for what we're about to get into. The whole idea is that when you engage with something toxic, you don't magically make it better. No, it changes you. It corrupts the system. And sometimes that corruption gets written down and turned into actual law. Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we'll talk about the normal, good idea of borrowing laws. Then, we'll get specific and define what makes a legal transplant malicious. After that, we're diving into some pretty shocking examples from history. We'll look at how these bad laws even spread in the first place, and then wrap up with the big question: how can we build a strong defense against them?
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. A good idea, borrowed? You know, this is the starting point, the common sense way we all think about how countries can learn from each other.
I mean, it just makes total sense, doesn't it? This whole process is called a legal transplant. Why reinvent the wheel? If a country comes up with a brilliant law for, say, protecting the environment or managing traffic, why wouldn't another country copy it? It's efficient, it's smart, you're basically getting a proven solution that's already been tested out.
And here's where things take a dark turn. We've all heard of laws that get borrowed and just fail. You know, they're a bad fit for the new country's culture or its economy, an honest mistake. But what if it's not a mistake? What if the problem is way, way darker? What if a country copies a law precisely because it's harmful? And what if someone in that chain of events wants that bad outcome?
And that question leads us right into our second section, defining malicious transplants. Let's really nail down what we're talking about here, because the details matter. Okay, so for a legal transplant to be truly malicious, it has to have two key ingredients. Part 1. The law causes real, objective harm. Think of one group forcing its rules on another for no good reason. And Part 2, this is the absolute clincher. There has to be intent. Someone, somewhere along the line knows this law is going to cause damage, and they do it anyway. They want it to happen. This is not an oopsie, not an accident.
And this is such a crucial distinction, right? It's the difference between an honest mistake and a deliberate act of harm. A failed transplant? That's like seeing a couch online that looks perfect, but when it arrives, it's way too big for your living room. A mistake. A malicious transplant, on the other hand, that's like someone knowingly bringing a container of poison into your home and leaving it on the kitchen counter. See the difference? One's a miscalculation, the other is malice.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's get into some powerful real-world examples. This is where it stops being an abstract idea and becomes shockingly real.
And for our first example, we're going to look at the spread of one of the most toxic ideologies imaginable: racist laws. This is just a textbook case of how cynical this can be. So in 1938, fascist Italy basically copy-pasted racial laws straight from Nazi Germany. But here's the wild part. Mussolini himself didn't even really believe in it. He reportedly thought the whole idea of racial purity was, and I quote, nonsense. So why did he do it? Pure political opportunism. He wanted to cozy up to his ally Hitler. He knew the law was harmful, but he transplanted it anyway for his own political advantage. That, right there, is malicious intent, plain and simple.
Okay, next up, a different kind of example. Let's look at how this same process can be used to export religious intolerance.
So take the Maldives. For a very long time, it was known for a pretty moderate form of Islam. But then, starting around the 90s, you see this shift. Foreign influence, especially from places like Saudi Arabia and certain madrasas in Pakistan, started to introduce a much stricter legal code. This wasn't something that grew organically from within. It was an import. Fast forward to 2010, and you have laws that make it illegal to even talk about any religion other than Islam. A foreign, more restrictive idea was deliberately transplanted, and it ended up overriding a local tradition of moderation.
And for our third and final example, we've got to talk about the long, dark shadow of colonialism.
This is such a classic example of one power imposing its will on others. Before the British Empire arrived, many places, like India, might have had social taboos, but they didn't have actual criminal laws against homosexuality. Then comes 1860, and Britain effectively exports its own buggery law through something called Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. And this wasn't just a one-off thing for India. Oh no, it became a one-size-fits-all legal template that got slapped onto colonies all across the empire. The intent was crystal clear: impose their values. And the truly damaging legacy of these laws is that many of them are still on the books in former colonies today. Okay, so after hearing those examples, you have to be asking yourself,
Why? I mean, why would anyone copy these awful laws? Let's dig into the mechanics of how this stuff actually spreads.
Yeah, really, what is it that makes a harmful law look so attractive to someone else?
Well, it really boils down to three things. First, you have the idea itself. Often, these bad ideas are appealing because they seem simple, radical, almost too good to be true. Then, there's the process. Sometimes lawmakers are just looking for a shortcut, a quick fix, or maybe they're getting pressured by a more powerful country. And finally, and this is maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, you look at the country itself. Inside that country, there's usually some powerful group, political, religious, whatever, that looks at that foreign law and sees it as the perfect weapon to crush their opponents or oppress a minority group.
So, we've laid out the problem, we've looked at the history, we get how it works. Now for the really crucial part. What can we do about it? How do we build a strong defense?
Right. If these malicious ideas spread like a virus, then what's the vaccine? How can a society protect itself from getting infected?
And the cool thing is, the solution mirrors the problem perfectly. To counter the bad idea, you have to fight it with better ideas. You can't just kill an idea, but you can offer a much more compelling, positive alternative. To fix the process, you need outside pressure. Other countries, international groups, and especially the citizens themselves have to demand transparency and challenge those power imbalances. And to protect the country, you have to build a rock-solid legal system, one with strong protections for human and minority rights, and maybe even something called eternity provisions in your constitution. Basically, core values that are locked in and made almost impossible to change.
And let's be super clear here. The goal is not to become an island, to shut ourselves off from the world and new ideas. That would be a terrible mistake. The real goal is to build a robust, legal and political immune system. You want to be strong enough to let the good ideas in while having the defenses to recognize and fight off the bad ones.
Which, leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. In a world where ideas and laws fly across the globe in an instant, how do we stay vigilant? How do we make sure that the solutions we're importing today are actually cures and not just another poison in disguise?